Morning, everybody. My name's Pete, and I'm an alcoholic, and I'm sober by the grace of God one day at a time. I like to start from the beginning about where I learned about fear, and I learned about rejection. And in 1944, February of 1944, I got adopted from a home in Austin, Texas, by a family that lived in Galveston. And I lived in that area down there for about 45 years. And when I was growing up, I always had this dream of a place that I had been before. Somehow it gave to me some kind of security, but I found out later in life, and we'll get to that, I discovered why I had that thing, and I kept asking my parents if I was adopted. Of course, they never did tell me. But anyway, I was raised in a small shotgun house. We had a tin roof. We were a very poor economy as far as money and stuff like that. My father worked for the railroad, and he'd get about $75 every 2 weeks. And there were many kids that had lots of things. They had their own bedroom. I slept in the living room till I was 21 years old. And the reason I tell you about fear and about rejection, because the family I moved into always never did accept me as I was. In fact, they'd get the older kids to pick on me and start fights with me and stuff like that. And this is where I got that inferiority complex. Remember that the alcoholic's problem is in his mind. It's not in his body. And somewhere around the age of 17 years old, 18 years old, I had an uncle. He belonged to a gang, motorcycle drivers, and I wanted to be like him because he wore a black motorcycle jacket, and he was mean and tough, and nobody said anything bad to him because he would take it on with them. So what I did is I got this idea in my mind. Now, this is long before I took a drink. I decided that if I could save enough money, I'd buy me a motorcycle jacket, and I did. And I used to stand in front of the mirrors and look at me with that motorcycle jacket, knowing that if I got the other two ingredients that my uncle had, that I would be like him. Now, where I got that idea, I don't know. Like I say, in the mind, it's pretty sick long before I got to Alcoholics Anonymous. And then I noticed that my uncle had blonde hair, and I didn't have blonde hair. So I got somebody to dye my hair blonde hair, and when they dyed my hair, it turned orange. And I said, well, that's not no big deal. That's pretty close to, you know how we rationalize things. And I said, that's okay. Now all I got to do is get me a Harley. Well, I got that jacket and I got that hair, and I went to sit on this Harley, and the thing was so heavy, and I weighed about 112 pounds. And I said, nah, I can't get this thing. So I went to Sears and got me a moped. Now, in 1962, if you were driving a moped with a black jacket and orange hair, people really took notice to you. And I needed notice. I guarantee you I needed notice. In fact, my aunt, when I went down the alley, she yelled and screamed. She thought somebody was fixing to break in her house. She didn't realize it was me. But these are the things that preceded me taking a drink. Also, I got married in 1966 to a lady, and we had one child. And after we had that one child, I started to drink on weekends. I would drink just a few, and then before I knew it, I drank more and more and more, and finally I went to whiskey. And when I went to whiskey, things started to go south. I remember my wife, her daddy was an alcoholic, and she said, I'm never going to live with another alcoholic. Didn't she know that was going to be me one day? And so what happened was I got to the point where, I drank, and then sometimes I'd black out a little bit, but not all the time, every once in a while. And One day we got up and she was just yelling and screaming at me. She said, "How in the world could you do that?" I said, what do you mean? What could I do? So she went over to the dresser drawer and she opened that dang drawer and she says, "Grab a hand of that." I said, "Well, that's your underwear and all that stuff in there." She said, "Just grab it." I grabbed it and boy, it was just soaking wet. And she said, "Did you get up and go to the bathroom last night?" Well, I said, "Yeah, I think I did." She said, "Did you mistake that dresser drawer for a toilet?" I said, "Let me tell you something. I'm a Catholic and I'm a Christian and we just don't do them things." And she, oh man, she was mad. And she said, "You're going to be an alcoholic just like my daddy." I said, "No, I will never do that. I'm going to quit." About a month later, I got up and I had one of them nights again and I had that dry in my mouth. I said, "I'm going to go brush my teeth." Well, at that time I wore glasses and I left my glasses on the stand on the side of the bed. And when I went in there, I started brushing my teeth and I noticed something. As I'm brushing my teeth, my dang tongue starts to swell and I can't hardly talk. I said, "What kind of dang toothpaste is this?" And I went and got my glasses and I looked back at that stuff and it said Preparation H on it. Oh my God, don't do that. Please don't do that. I still got that taste in my mouth. These things started to get worse and my drinking got longer and longer and longer. And there were many times I left my wife all alone so I could go drink with the guys. I didn't drink in bars. We had a thing called a Texas City Dyke and we went out on the dyke and we got drunk and we got so drunk sometimes we had to wait till the next day to come home. But after this, after 13 years of marriage, my wife said, "No more." I said, "What do you mean no more?" I said, "After all I do for you, how in the world could you?" She had my clothes out on the porch in brown paper bags, all of them, and said, "Don't come back anymore." I loaded my darn things in the truck and I went out to the dyke and I stayed on the dyke for about 3 or 4 days. And then she let me come home. And then another thing happened. And, the alcoholic is so unaware of what's going on in his life when he starts to drink. By this time, I'm in trouble with my drinking. And she told me, "You can't drink in the house no more. You can drink outside, but you can't drink in the house." So what did I do? The alcoholic with his intuitive mind, I went to the backyard and I built me a little house out of plywood. And in that little house, I put a little couch and ice chest and a CB radio and my booze and stuff. And this is in November when it's really cold. And I run out of lumber when it comes to the floor. So that wasn't no big deal. I just laid a carpet down there, and I'm sitting out there and I had this little window I found was all bent up in the alley and I put it up the little window where I could look out. I used a towel for a curtain. And one day I'm looking in there and I said to myself while I'm drinking, "I sure showed that woman." And I looked out that little window. She was in the kitchen window laughing at me. And I realized she was inside where it was warm. And I was out in that little house freezing to death. And there were icicles on the roof and all kind of stuff like that. And, reality hit me. And she kept threatening that she was going to turn me over to Alcoholics Anonymous. She had called the AA number and they told her, she said, "I want to know what a real alcoholic is." And, so they described that to her. And she threatened me several times. But of course, the minute she hung up the phone, I went back to my old ways and I told myself this: who pays the bills here? I think, who's making all the money? No woman's going to tell me I can't drink. So several times she caught me in a weak moment and I called Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, if there's one thing you want to do with an alcoholic, if you want him to try to get sober, you get his attention. And they called a couple of people and they came over to me. And one of them was my neighbor. He lived two doors down. And my wife told me, she says, "I'm just embarrassed. I said, well, why are you embarrassed? She said, everybody in the neighborhood is going to know you're alcoholic. I said, honey, how many times have you slammed the door and I've been outside naked in our neighborhood? She said, do you think they're going to not know you're alcoholic? I said, well, I don't know. I hope he don't come. So he came, and when he came in, he said something that got my attention. My wife said, I'm going to go in the other room while you work with Pete, while you tell him about this alcoholism and stuff. And I said, okay. And the guy said, no, ma'am, you're not going anywhere. You sit down right here beside him because you're sicker than he is. And boy, when they said that, I said, man, if I can get sober and I can talk to her like that guy talked to her, man, won't that be great? And this is the way I started, and they started to take me to AA meetings. There are many other things that have happened, and I don't want to waste a whole bunch of time on how I got drunk, because everybody knows how to get drunk. But what I want to say is that at this time, there were many things that happened. And one of the things that happened was that my wife went to help her sister have a baby. I drove for a piece of property about 20 miles away, and I had the two kids with me. I had an 11-year-old and a 5-year-old. And as I'm getting close to the property, the driver's door came open. I fell out. The truck runned over me. And my kids, my 11-year-old hit the brakes. He knew enough to hit the brakes. And the next thing I know, I'm laying on the ground with gravel in my face and bleeding. And the next thing I know is I get back in the truck. And the next thing I know, I drive back that 20 miles without knowing how in the world I ever got there. You know, the alcoholic says sometimes, I don't hurt anybody except myself. Well, I'm telling you here, I hurt my family dearly. And so I go to a meeting, he takes me to a meeting, and I was 34 years old and they wouldn't even let me drive. They told me no. I said, man, I got a nice 66 Pontiac out there. He said, yeah, I noticed that thing. He said, every time you get in it started, it catches fire and you have to put it out with a fire extinguisher. He said, no, we're going to take you to meetings. So they took me to meetings. And when I walked into my first meeting, I don't know how they knew I was new, but they knew somehow how I was new. And so when I walked in there must have been 75 to 100 people in that meeting. And every one of them people came up to me and said, we've been waiting on you. I said, man, these people are crazy. I don't even know any of these darn people. Who the heck could they be? And so I sat on the front row of Alcoholics Anonymous and I went through the DTs. Nobody sat next to me. When I first got to AA, when I sat down, you had plenty of room on either side of me for two reasons. First of all, I hadn't taken a bath in a long time. Second, I had this nerve thing where my arm would flip out to the left and flip out to the right without me even knowing it, you know. And I was very suspicious of everybody. I said, I wonder what these people want out of me. And I sat there, and one day I came to an Alcoholics Anonymous. And when I came to an Alcoholics Anonymous, I realized something. I realized I was really in the wrong place. I really was in the wrong place. And, you know, I still stayed there because I didn't want to lose my marriage and I didn't want to lose my family. But I stayed there long enough till I learned how to listen. And I started to identify with people. There was a lady in there and she said she'd been to the nut ward about 32 times. And she said, my husband runs a pharmacy. And she said, I've been to that nut ward about 32 times. And she said, the 33rd time I was going to go there, they were going to do a lobotomy on me. And she said, instead of that lobotomy, somebody said, why don't you try Alcoholics Anonymous? And she tried Alcoholics Anonymous and she had been sober 4 years. And I said to myself, as afraid as I am and how I'm scared of losing my wife, I'm scared of how life's going to be without alcohol, because it was actually the cure for me for a long time. And then it started to turn on me. And I said, I don't know how I'm going to make it. And I was full of fear and I was wanting to drink all the time, but I didn't take the drink. And I finally come to the point where I realized two things. Pete, you can't drink, and Pete, you can't stop. And I call it the gift of desperation. When I got the gift of desperation, I got interested in the big book. And at 45 days old, I was trying to sponsor people. And my sponsor said, Pete, you don't have anything to give them. I said, well, okay. He said, whenever it's time for you to sponsor people, he said, they will appear. He said, don't worry about that. He said, the first thing you got to do is you got to get interested in these steps and start practicing these steps in your life. Okay. I said, I'm fine except with steps 2 and 3. I said, because I was raised a Catholic and I was praying to God my whole life, and he never answered any of my things, any of the prayers I gave him, because I had a real important prayer that I gave him when I was 20 years old. I had this gal that I was in love with. I know I was in heat, but I wasn't in love. And so what I did was I said, God, if you'll give me that lady, I said, I'll go to confession and I'll go to mass all the time and I'll do all the things that they want me to do. And God didn't give me that woman. When I was about a year sober, I run into that broad, and I tell you this, I sure thank God that he didn't answer my prayers. Man, she was a beautiful, beautiful woman. And when I seen her a year later, she weighed about 200 pounds. I said, oh my God, what? I said, I better quit praying for stuff, because God's not going to answer that stuff that's not good for me. So what I did was I went and got interested in the steps. I started studying the book, and I contributed Joe and Charlie to a lot of my sobriety because they helped me, because I had a sponsor that he would tell you to go do the steps, but he never did sit down with me in the book and work the steps. So Joe and Charlie's tapes really helped me, especially the first ones, And the first thing I had to realize that I was powerless over alcohol. Now, how did I know I was powerless over alcohol? I had to look back at my track record. I had to look about how the times I drank, I didn't really want to drink. And the times I wanted to quit, I couldn't quit. And I had to look about the mess and the wreckage in my past. And as I discovered that, I realized not only was I powerless over alcohol, but I was powerless over a lot of things. And you got to realize, I was married 13 years to my wife, and when I got in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I realized this. I realized that some changes had to be done in them people. If my wife and them would just act a little different, and my kids would get good grades and good that stuff, I would be okay. And of course, that's the alcoholic mind. He's always trying to blame somebody else for his problems. And so what I realized is I started working the steps, and an amazing thing happened. My wife went to Al-Anon and my kids went to Alateen. And I'm going to tell you this, when I worked the steps, them people got better. They were a lot better than they were before. And I said, what I heard in the meetings, that the alcoholic is a very, very, very lonely person. He's got a lot of things wrong with him. He's always thinking somebody's going to get to him or do something to him, And there used to be a guy in the newspaper. His name was Joe Spitz. And Joe Spitz would walk around all the time with this cloud over his head, because he just knew no matter what happened, something was going to happen, and it was going to bad, and it was going to happen to him. And that's the way I lived my first year in Alcoholics Anonymous. Little by little, I began more and more to know the book and to realize some things about it. And I told my sponsor, I said about God, I said, hey, look. And he said, you don't have to take step 2 all the way. He said, you can take that piecemeal. He said, and when you get to the 3rd step, he said, we'll take the 3rd step together on our knees. Now, I'm going to tell you this. They told me to pray when I first come to Alcoholics Anonymous in the morning and ask God to keep me sober that day. And when I went to bed at night, on my knees to tell him I would thank him for that. And I'm going to tell you, the first time I did that now, I wasn't accustomed to doing that, but in my front room, I got on my knees and I said, God, if you're there, please help me not drink, but please don't let my wife walk in here and see me on my knees. And he didn't. And you know what? I did that in somewhere about the 15th day in Alcoholics Anonymous. The obsession to drink left me. It was 10:30 in the morning. And for the first 14 days, all day long, all I could think about how I could get a drink without anybody knowing it. So I moved along in my process of recovery in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. And I didn't know what kind of sanity we were talking about. And I heard people saying, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results is insanity. And I didn't realize for a while that alcohol had control of me. And I got ready to take the third step, and I told them, I just can't take that third step. And they said, why? I said, well, God didn't have anything to do with me. He never did have anything to do with me, And one of them old timers come to me after meeting. He said, Pete, he said, why don't you take the third step? I said, well, I don't believe he's going to help me. And old Jack told me this. He said, Pete, if you take the third step, your life won't be in the hands of an idiot. And I got mad, but after I thought about that and I went back and looking at my track record, I realized, hey, he was 100% right. And then we come to the dreaded fourth step. My God of mercy. There's no way I'm going to put that stuff in there. By this time, I'm a liar. I'm a thief. I do all kinds of crazy things, and to put that on paper, man, I could go to jail. In fact, there was one of them that amounted to thousands and thousands of dollars. And what I did was I went over and got one of them Hazelton things, one of them Hazelton things that asks you all them little questions in there, and they just have you answer yes or no. I said, man, that's simple. So there was a priest I knew that was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. So I went over to him, and that man had so much patience. He was experienced in hearing fifth steps, not confessions. I'm talking about fifth steps. So I went over to him and I read that stuff to him. And every time I would read an answer, he would say, well, what were you doing? And then he'd say, do you think you've hurt anybody there? Well, man, when you're sober and you got some kind of little thinking in your mind that's pretty clear, you realize what you have done. And he went on and on and on, question after question after question. And by the time I left that man, he knew everything about me. And then I went home. Then I went home and my wife was in Al-Anon and she was fixing to take a fourth step. I said, well, honey, let me show you how to do that. She said, no, let me call my sponsor here. She called her sponsor. She says, you don't let him do that to you. Oh, my goodness. Then I realized after the fifth step for the first time that I had to go on with the rest of the steps. By this time, some sort of sanity came back to me after the fifth step. And I realized that I was part of the human race. And this priest also did another thing that I like to do whenever I help people. He shared part of his alcoholism with me. And I'll be darned if that guy didn't do almost everything that I had done. And I said, in the position he's in, and he can open up to me. I mean, there's no reason I can't open up to him. And so here we go. We're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. I didn't realize for a long time that there were 5 different sections of the fourth and fifth step. And I didn't realize that until the 12 and 12 come out. Because I was thinking about, and I wrote down these defects of character, and some of them I was willing, and some of them I wasn't willing to be rid of. And they said, if you're not willing, you have to pray for the willingness to do that. And I prayed and I prayed and I prayed. And little by little, I got to the point where what I call untreated alcoholism. And untreated alcoholism covered me with fear, guilt, and remorse. And as it filled me with that, I realized I had to be willing to get rid of all of these. And those I didn't want to, I got to the 7th step, and me and my sponsor did the 7th step, that God removed from me all these things that stand in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Well, then we got to the big one. Made a list of all people we harmed. Oh, my Lord. I wrote down there, and I got to tell you about this. I got to tell you about this one guy, because this is the power that God had worked in my life after that. I wrote this guy down, and me and him and his wife and me were out drunk one time. And we were about 15 miles from where they lived. And we run out of money and run out of drinks. And the guy told his wife, said, I guess we got to go home. And she said, oh, no, I know a way we can make some money. And I listened. And what she really said is, she said, do you know anybody that'd pay for a little sex? I said, no, I don't know anybody. I said, but yeah, there's one friend of mine. I don't know. He's kind of not much with the women. And we went over there, and she said, nah, ain't no way. Well, boy, I got so mad, I kicked them out of the car, and they had to walk back all the way from Texas City to Galveston. Well, he got pissed, and what he did is he changed the whole story and said that I kicked him out because I wanted sex with his wife, and went and told my wife. Oh, my Lord, did that start some crap. And I told his brother, I said, if I see him, I'm going to shoot that sucker, because I had my .357 Magnum I used to carry with me. And I said, I'm going to get him. Well, here's what happened. About a month later, I couldn't find the guy. And we went to the hospital because her mother was in the hospital. And I'll be darned, in that hospital, there's 2 beds in that dang room, and that woman was in one of them. So I'd become willing to make amends to him. But when I seen him, boy, all that anger and all that stuff came back, and I just walked out of the room. Well, he followed me to the Coke machine. And he said, Pete, he said, and this guy ain't never known nothing about Alcoholics Anonymous, nothing about the program or nothing. And he says this to me, Pete, if I've harmed you, I would like to make that straight, because I was wrong to go to your wife and to tell her that that's what you did. And I knew that was a lie. You don't think God works? I mean, man, there wasn't nothing I could do except, say the same thing to him, and to make that amends. And then when I made another list, I had a guy on the list that I had fired when I was his boss. And it took a long time. It took 15 years for me to make that amends, because I couldn't find the guy. And my sponsor told me, he said, you make the amends you can in step 9, all you can now, and become willing to make the ones you can't. And I did. I made them. And I found out after I made the amends for the first people, there were some other people that I had changed my mind about, and that I would be willing to make amends to them. And one of them was this guy. And this guy, I fired him because I was stealing, and I put it where he was stealing. And he had a family and everything, and he had young kids and everything. And I don't know what happened to him, but one day I was taking an inventory in Houston, a parts inventory, and this guy was there. And his name was John. And I walked up to John. I said, John, can I talk to you in private here for just a few minutes? He said, oh, yeah. So he went in there. And as I'm beginning to tell him about, I was wrong about telling him that he had stole where I was a stealer. And if he wanted, I would go back to them people. and tell him about it. And he started laughing. And I said, John, no, this is a serious thing with me. I can't stay sober unless I do this. He said, no, he said, Pete, he said, I'm not lying to you. I'm not laughing at you. He said, what I'm laughing about is when I worked for you, I was making $10 an hour. And he said, the minute you fire me, I got a job for $25 an hour. So the thought hit me, Pete, who's been suffering all this time? Who's been suffering with this stuff inside of you? You have been suffering. The guy actually got better, and God made it better for him where he can get more money for his family. You know, and this is the way the amends things work for me. Some of the people said, get out, don't ever come back. Some people said, okay, it's going to be all right. I owed my mother and father a lot of money, and I paid that back. And what I realized over the years, and at the end of step 9, was in step 9, it's a release of freedom for me. And my sponsor said this over and over again. He said, them steps are for you. They're not for anybody else. He said, I don't want you to say you're sorry. He said, because some people know that. You've been telling them how sorry you were for years and years and years. And he said another thing. He said, freedom from bondage is freedom from self. And if you can get freedom from self, and you can realize that the main problem you got is in your mind, then he said you can stay sober. Well, not everything's peaches and roses in Alcoholics Anonymous. For 8 years in Alcoholics Anonymous, the family then got a little better. Not at first, because we would have perfect 1 hour in Alcoholics Anonymous. And my wife had real perfect time in Al-Anon, and the kids had perfect time in Alateen. And then we would get in the car and World War III would start again. And we would be accusing and cussing each other out and everything. And one night after we got home, God gave me this thought. I said, hey, let's all sit on the floor here. I said, why don't we try something that my sponsor's been trying to tell me, and I told him it would never work in the family. He said, when you sit down, he said, Pete, read tradition 1. And I did to him. Common welfare, our common welfare has to come first. And then he said, read tradition 2. He said, there's no ultimate authority in this house, except as the group of people that live there decide the way it ought to be. So we sat down and we went through the steps, through the traditions, and we told the kids, they said, Daddy, can I share the truth? I said, I want y'all to. I want you to talk to us and to share the truth. And they did. Boy, they really laid it on Mom and Daddy. And they said this to Mom and Daddy. They said, you know why we're so bad in school and we're so out of touch? He says, because we've been copying you. And boy, you talk about an eye-opener. What they said to us, don't tell us what to do. Show us by example what to do, and we'll do it. And that's amazing. That's an amazing thing if you have a family to work the traditions in your home. And little by little, one day I get a call from my daughter. And, Bill Wilson talks about this fear that every alcoholic has. And it will always be with us. It's called impending doom. I don't know what's going to happen or when it's going to happen, but man, it's going to be bad. Well, my daughter called up. She said, Daddy, she says, I went to the doctor and they said I have cancer. I said, oh my God. And of course, you know what happens to alcoholics once you hear that. You think of the worst. You never think that it's going to be all right. You always think of the worst. Well, anyway, they wanted to take a biopsy. And me and my wife was in the waiting room there while they were taking a biopsy of her and seeing how much it had spread in there. And we did the third step, me and my wife, in that little room while we was waiting. And it wasn't 15 minutes after we took that third step that they come back and said, Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so, we have good news for you. There was cancer there, but we have cut it all out, and we think she's going to be okay. Then about 2 or 3 years later, my daughter kept getting blisters in her mouth, and they couldn't find out what was going on with her. And she ended up having Crohn's disease. And they took her to the hospital, and they cut her from the navel on down and took all her stuff out of there, put it on the table, washed it, and put it back. And we thought she was going to die. But I can't tell you how much help I got from the people in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I can't tell you how much help I got from God. But somewhere along the line, I had recovered a little bit to know that everything was going to be all right. And whenever I got in fear again, I would go to this power greater than myself, and he would tell me, Pete, don't worry about it. It's going to be all right. Okay. During this time, my father got cancer, and I had a job where I was working for a seismic company where I was a senior buyer, and I sat and wore ties and wore suits every day to work, and I spent millions and millions of dollars for that company to buy supplies and stuff they needed, and I lost that job. And you had to go back to the unemployment line where I was one place I was making six-figure salary, and then I had to go back where I was making hundreds of dollars every 2 weeks. And I did that. And I didn't know how we were going to make it, but thank God for my wife. She got a little job babysitting kids and stuff like that. And the thing about that whole deal is I was off for a whole year. Finally got another job after that, but nothing that paid like the other one did. And then I wondered, how come God let that happen to me? I'm doing all the right things. I'm trying to stay sober and all that. And as I get to the other side of that, I realized two things. First of all, me and my father were never close. In the last 11 months he was alive, I got close to that man like I had never been close to that. And just before he died, he was coming in and out of these comas. And he said something to me that I was hoping that I would hear my whole life. He said, son, he says, I'm proud of you. He said, you know what? You have exceeded all my expectations for you. And he said, I don't want you to get the big head about it now. He said, it's that AA thing you belong to that has helped you so much. I can't tell you how long I've waited for that. I can't tell you how long I've longed for my parents to realize I might be of some worth and I might be of some success. And now I realize why that happened and how it had to happen. So we move along in sobriety. We work steps over and over again. I haven't found in my book where it says you work the first 9 steps one time. I haven't found that yet. I'm still looking for it, but I know it's not true. And the reason I know it's not true is because later on I wrote the 12 and 12, and it said something about alcoholics going for annual and semi-annual house cleanings. That means every year I think I'm resentment free, and I have to go back and look at it again. And I realized that I have other resentments. Now, they may not be as great as the original ones were, but I still have resentments, because anybody that goes to Alcoholics Anonymous, in my opinion, if you like everybody in Alcoholics Anonymous, there's something wrong with you, because it's natural for the alcoholic not to like everybody, but he should love everybody, and so I go along here and I'm thinking about things, and then the next thing that happens is, God has a sense of humor. He really does have a sense of humor. My daddy died, and guess what? He sent my mother to live with us. Now, you put 2 women in a house with 1 man, what do you think happens? If they get in an argument, whose side are you going to be on? You're going to be on your mother's side, or you're going to be on your wife's side. Either one you choose, you're going to be a loser. You're going to be a loser. So the best thing to do, and I learned this from my sponsor. I said, what do I do? He said, you tell them to settle their own problems. Don't involve you. And God, I'm glad I did that. Of course, they got mad when I said it. Both of them got mad at me. But at least, they couldn't blame me for their problems. You got a mother in there, she wants to run the household because she's used to do it. And you got a wife in there, she wants to run the household, and they're both trying to run it, and they don't agree. They don't agree, And so after that, and then my mother lived with us for 22 years, and my wife, I tell you what, I don't think I could have picked a better wife. Let me tell you what my wife did. My wife would get up 4:00 in the morning, go to the school, get everything ready for the workers when they come in. She ordered all the supplies and stuff for the school. And then she would get off at 1:00, come home, take care of my mother, and have my supper by the time I got home about 7:00 at night, because I had to drive from Texas City to Houston to the job to make enough money. And she did that for years. For 22 years, she did that. Then what happened was we used to have these big old parties. We loved to have Christmas parties. In the first 25 years we were sober, there was at least 45 to 50 people at our house for them Christmas parties. And my wife would cook and cook and cook and cook and cook. And she cooked all kinds of things, Mexican food, gumbo, all kinds of stuff, and have it there. And man, when them people left, there wouldn't be a drop of nothing left. Wouldn't be enough for a drop. And she actually, for my daughter, when she got married, she cooked her whole menu for her getting married. She did the whole thing. I thank God all the time for my wife, and I thank her for my kids. Somewhere around 2017, my wife retired, and she attracted dementia. Now, she had did everything by memory up until she retired, but once she retired, she started to get dementia, and I started to have to take care of her. We had a lot of times, because she would get what they call UTIs, urinary tract infections, and when people with dementia get that, they go crazy. They want to kill you. They want to throw things at you. They want to knife you. They want to do all kinds of things. And in 2019, I had to surrender my wife to a nursing home. Also in 2019, I got the largest kidney stones you can ever get. They were over 10 millimeters, and I had them out. And in September, I had brain surgery. See, not everything is good when you get sober. Life is life. And I remember what everybody asked me at the meeting, says, when you're going in for brain surgery, she said, aren't you afraid? I said, well, no, not really. And she said, what do you mean you're not? I said, you're not telling the truth, Pete. I am telling the truth. Here's what I know. If I die, I'm going to be with that power greater than myself. If I live, I'm going to be with you people. So what better place could I be? And see, this is the change that come to a guy that thought prayer was a weakness. And prayer is a character builder. When I got to AA, I want to be anybody except Pete. I could name you a dozen guys I'd like to be. And I don't want to be nobody except Pete now. And the thing about it is that the amazing thing that's happened to me in the last 42 years of sobriety is I no longer question God. Oh, sometimes for a short time I'll question him. But then this little voice that comes into my mind is really amazing. It says, Pete, it's going to be all right. And when I first heard that, I thought I was going crazy. I said, I'm hearing voices. you know? And I know that's all because of prayer and meditation. The easiest part of meditation that I've found, and I've tried all kinds of things, just like I did in AA, you know, and I realized that if I'll just get in a room where there's nobody there and it's quiet, like I'm in the one right now, and I try to shut my mind down, which in the beginning it was hard, but now it's a little easier, quite a bit easier. Shut it down and listen for that real quiet voice that will come to me. I remember the first time I had happened, 10, 11, and 12, I thought for years were maintenance steps. But then I read in the 10th step, it says our next promise is to grow in fellowship, grow into usefulness. And I forget exactly what it says. It says it talks about growing away from a drink. See, this is where I learned about growing away from a drink. I don't stay away from a drink anymore. I grow away from it through spiritual principles. And spiritual principles are the ones behind all the steps. If I stay in 10, that step is not about, it's about continuance. It's not about honesty. 1 is about honesty. And so if I stay into all the 12-step program, then I have to remember I have to be honest. You know, and what I have to realize today that as I am 1 drink away, but if I practice a program of steps and go to the meetings and share my experience with another human being, I don't have anything to worry about. I'll tell you a real thing. When I put my wife in the nursing home, I had never cooked. My mama cooked for me and my wife cooked for me. And now I got to learn how to cook or starve. When they say in AA, you do a lot of things and you make a lot of mistakes, well, guess what? You do the same thing with cooking, you know, until you learn how to cook some things. And now over the last 2 years, I've learned how to cook a whole bunch of stuff. And you know what I realized about that? What I just have to cook for me, and what pain my wife must have had to go through to cook for all of us. You start to value the things that you don't have anymore. And I love Alcoholics Anonymous, and I love all the people in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I hope I get to stay here one more day. Thank you, Damon, for letting me share.